have three co-sponsors for today's First Monday Forum. I already alluded to the Public Diplomacy Council, the Public Diplomacy Association of America is also a co-sponsor, co-host, and so is the USC Annenberg Center for Communication, Leadership, and Policy. I want to say a special thank you to PDC rising professional, Alistair Somerville, for serving as our technical host. He reminds me to tell you to put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you have any technical difficulties, please let him know in the chat box. Now, I want to say a special thank you to Michael McCary, who's a member of the Public Diplomacy Association of America, as well as a board member of the PDC. He has organized today's program, and along with Mark Rebstock of Meridian, is one of the people who are co-chairing advocacy initiatives. You may have known Mike when he was on the Hill working for an Illinois congressman. That was quite a while ago. He was also had served in the Foreign Service of the United States. You may know him best because of his role at the helm of the Alliance for International Exchange. So again, welcome to everyone. We are so grateful you're here, and I will turn this program over to Mike McCary. Mike?
There. Okay. Thanks, Sherry. Thanks very much. Excited about this program. It's a timely topic, and as Sherry said, we've got very good speakers. Both of our speakers today worked for a number of years on the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the State Department, so they've been involved in the crafting and drafting of the appropriations bills. Full disclosure, I used to lobby them when I worked at the Alliance. They are really, really good, and so we're going to get right into this. I thought what we would do format-wise is, because there's a lot of ground to cover and we have a standing room only audience, metaphorically speaking, I want to leave a lot of time for questions. So rather than presentations, I'm going to have a kind of a dialogue, some Q&A with Kate and Michele, and then we'll try to get through some of the basics of the situation, then open it up for questions. Brief introductions of our speakers. Michele Wymer is now a partner with the Kyle House Group. It's a government relations organization here in Washington. Prior to that, she was on the Hill for a decade. On the Appropriations Subcommittee, she worked under the leadership of two senators in the role of chairman or ranking member, depending on the Congress, Jug Gregg from New Hampshire and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who's still in that position. Her purview at the committee covered the full range of federal agencies in the Foreign Affairs account: State Department, AID, Peace Corps, Broadcasting Board of Governors. Prior to joining the subcommittee, she worked for Senator Thad Cochran from Mississippi. Kate Eltrich spent 8 years on the subcommittee, same subcommittee, first working under Senator Fritz Hollings from South Carolina, and then Patrick Leahy, of course, from Vermont. After President Obama was elected, he appointed Kate as Director of Legislative Affairs at the Office of Management and Budget. Think for a minute about what that job description must have been like. And after, and she was a senior advisor to two OMB directors, Peter Orzag and Jack Lew. After she left government and got into the private sector, the Alliance hired her to help us on a couple of really important projects. One was the 2013 Immigration Reform Bill, which in its original form would have devastated the exchange community and the programs, and later on a high school exchange issue. She's recently formed her own firm, KAE Strategic, and in 2020, last year, she received an Outstanding Lobbyist Award from the National Institute of Lobbying and Ethics. So let's get started. When I used to come up to see the two of you, we would always meet together. It was one of those rare instances where I didn't have a meeting with the Democratic staffer and then a separate meeting with the Republican staffer. And appropriations, it's been said for a long time, is the least partisan part of activity that takes place on the Hill. Is that still true in this hyper-partisan era?
I hope so, and I think so. Something that I talk about all the time, and Michele and I team up and work together on some projects, that there are kind of three types of folks in Washington. There's Republicans, Democrats, and there's appropriators. And the people who work on the Appropriations Committee kind of have a unique rapport with each other. And I think particularly in foreign affairs, and then especially in public diplomacy, international exchange, to some extent broadcasting issues, there's just so much bipartisanship, and people believe in the programs coming from the same perspective to a certain extent. And so it's very easy to collaborate and work together. But, as we see, the need for bipartisanship is really heightened, especially in budget issues. You can't pass anything without some support from the minority party. So that's going to continue to be a core piece of advocacy. Right now we're dealing with the reconciliation bill, a very rare vehicle that only has to have, simple majority to pass. But the appropriations bills that will flow from that do need, more votes, and could be filibustered in the Senate.
Yeah, I agree. And Michael, I think it's kind of the question of the day. The last 4 years, certainly we've seen kind of a decline in bipartisanship, and the rhetoric across both sides of the aisle has really heightened. But among appropriators, and especially on these issues, there's actually been a cohesivity. Even in the face of big budget proposed cuts by the Trump administration, you saw appropriators on both sides of the aisle step in to fund things fully, to work together, to overfund programs that the president had proposed cutting. So I think there's a great tradition of bipartisanship on the committee. Kate and I grew up together on the Hill, as I like to say, and we really did attend all meetings together. That was kind of how our committee operated. And it was fun, as other committees and other policy perspectives, they really kind of went at each other. We were very collaborative. And so it kind of set the tone for how we operate now, but also it really is reflective of how our international funding is developed. That those same traditions are true. And whenever we go to the Hill, when Kate and I are working together on a client, we'll go together. And we'll meet with appropriators together, and they still meet together. So there is still that same level of bipartisanship that I think is really important and really fundamental to these programs.
That's good news. Thank you. Been a lot of commentary, as you know, about damage done to the State Department. I'll just leave it there, during the last administration. And how much is that, I'm talking about the department as a whole now, not just public diplomacy, but how much is that recognized on the Hill? What kind of level of concern is there among appropriators about that? And how might it be addressed?
It's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of people are very hopeful from both parties about President Biden coming in and really trying to reintroduce America to the world and look to, I think people from both parties recognize the need for the U.S. to be more engaged with the world. So especially when you look at those agencies, I think, unfortunately, we are dealing with a little bit of like a death by 1,000 cuts, that so many people on the Hill in the foreign affairs area felt bombarded by bad news and bad decisions the last several years. And it was very hard. I think it's hard sometimes to differentiate or prioritize how they're going to attack those. But I think everyone is eager to see that. I think one of the biggest indications that you see is Tony Blinken as Secretary of State having such a close personal relationship with the president is a great first indication that you have somebody in that job who, and you have had this in previous administrations, but I do think it's somewhat unique, of an individual who is both very close with the president, but also not seeking his own profile or spotlight. And so he's not really looking for a second act after being Secretary of State. So it's a very unique position that he's really genuinely going to be just driving the administration's priorities through the department, but also have the back of the department and the staff and elevate those things if needed.
Yeah. And I would say, Michael, it's kind of the question that everyone is asking, and they're asking that across the development world as well. They're asking it across diplomacy, across development, because, it's been a rough go. and you add a pandemic on top of it, and there's a lot of need. I think that everyone is pretty motivated and excited by the level of importance that this administration is placing on diplomacy. Obviously, Biden has an amazing track record as head of the Foreign Relations Committee for so long. And so everyone knows that it really is in his interests, and it's really where his heart lies. And then I believe that, Congress will step up to the challenge. There's a lot of issues right now, obviously, that this country is facing. And so this will be a distracted year for sure. But I do believe that this also is a year where we're going to hear the drumbeat of diplomacy, and it's going to be louder, and it's going to come back stronger than we've seen in a while. Michael, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. I hope you're right, is what I said. But turning to public diplomacy more specifically, of course, everyone recognizes that it suffered badly in the last administration, and not just because of challenging messaging. I want to talk a little about field presence and officers operating in the field. We've heard the suggestion from time to time, and Secretary Gates made this in his Foreign Affairs article, that the department might want to think about redeployment of officers. I think his point was maybe more in Turkey and China and less in the European Union. But I think also there's a point of more officers overall. And this is a question that's come up several times in the conversations I've had in the Public Diplomacy Council with colleagues there. There's a question like that about, particularly in terms of public diplomacy. So the number of officers who are out there, the strength of the public diplomacy corps, and the distribution of them, is that something Congress would get into or have an interest in?
Well, I think we're definitely seeing staffing becoming an overall priority, and the members kind of who aren't always in the weeds on how the department operates are hearing more and more and understanding better that staffing has just been constrained for long enough, and the pressure is now being felt in program areas. What I'm hopeful to see is that there will be some emphasis from the administration, and I think the budget requests, when that comes out this spring, will be the first indication of that, where they maybe have some priority areas in the staffing, because you will, I'm sure, see a very strong message that they're reinvesting in the people. But will they also then say, and our priority is to have some redistribution, whether it's geographically or programmatically? And that could be an area in public diplomacy where you could see a good signal from the administration that not only are they going to put maybe some more program dollars there, but they also want more staffing. And I'm hearing this in the advocacy space actually more frequently than ever, which is, it's great to increase the dollars on a program, but we also need to have more people in the field to increase recruitment or oversight of the programs. And so connecting those two things is actually starting to happen, and I think is very worthwhile in this area for folks who are talking to policymakers. It's definitely a good connection to make in their minds as implementers from that perspective, to say that you can't just increase the program money and not have more people to do it.
Yeah, I think it's really important right now, and it's a good thing you brought up advocacy, Kate. I think there are a lot of competing priorities, and so really having people weigh in on this, if this is a huge priority to rebuild the State Department and to get people back into the field, the administration needs to hear from the field, and they need to hear, the Hill needs to hear it loud and clear too. And that kind of goes across all PD issues. There really needs to be a very concerted effort to elevate the profile of this and the importance of this, and to make clear that this is a priority, and that one that should be executed sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
Question on broadcasting. We all know President Biden, and when he was on the Hill, was a staunch advocate of government broadcasting, and the public, broadcasting in recent years has suffered, another area that suffered under the Trump administration. Any ideas how Biden will move on that, and how Congress might react? Is this how much of an issue is this on the Hill?
It's a tough issue. I mean, I think overall, just there were so many damaging things more on the personnel side the last few years. I think that got a lot of attention on the Hill, and some concerns that because the Hill just bought into a reauthorization a few years ago that gave more flexibility. And then that was maybe taken advantage of. I think there's a concern, but I think most people on the Hill feel like that just needs to be unpacked, and maybe hopefully the authorization committees will dig into it in a deeper way to be able to say, okay, here's what worked with the reauthorization and here's what didn't, and where should we go going ahead. So it feels to me like an issue, and I don't know what you feel like, Michele, but it feels like an area that most people are going to be looking for some more independent assessment and advice about how to move forward and what the right path is, because I think there's bipartisan support for the USAGM authorization, and then yet bad things happened. And I don't think there's enough insight into what the next step should be. And so I suspect that will be something that takes a little bit longer lead for the Biden administration to tackle.
Yeah, I think it'll be indicative when the budget comes out to see if it's prioritized and to see if that is something that is increased out of the gates. That'll be a kind of a strong indicator of how much pressure will be applied to the Hill on it. Again, there's so many issues right now, and you've got a pandemic relief package that is kind of sucking up all the oxygen right now in DC, and then priorities that are going to follow that. And so it'll just be interesting to see, first of all, what the budget reveals overall, and then kind of the timeline of how to get there. This is a tough issue on the Hill, and it's one that it's kind of been a trade-off. I will say, even with big proposed cuts, again, you saw some bipartisan response. You saw some partisan response too, for sure. But I think that there was a good bipartisan response in kind of holding the line and holding firm when our former president wanted to kind of delete the program entirely and get rid of public broadcasting. So I think that's a good indicator. I mean, it just shows that Congress isn't there. And now, obviously, with a supermajority, that isn't a possibility right now. But I think that, again, it'll just be a matter of priorities. And there's so many competing right now. And so it's another opportunity, again, to elevate it if it's an issue that's really important and really needs to have more focus, meeting with authorizers, going and talking about kind of the underlying legislative issues. That's something to really take a look at as a council and as a group, and really decide priorities.
When might we see a presidential budget, do you think?
Well, like most transition years, I think the Biden administration is following the typical timeline of submitting what they call a skinny budget, or kind of a top line, and that'll have the big picture, where they want to go financially. So grow the budget. This is the first year there's no statutory caps on discretionary funding. So it's a big opportunity for Biden to say where he feels like programs should be. But it'll really just give State Department probably a top line amount. And so usually that's submitted in March. I think because Congress and the White House are so focused right now on the COVID relief package, they don't want to confuse things and send up the 22 budget while the 21 COVID relief is being debated. So I suspect it'll be time just to when that wraps up, whether it's the last week of March or beginning of April. Then that'll kick off the FY22 process. But the real detailed justifications from all the agencies that we're normally looking for what the line items are for all these programs probably won't be till the 1st of May. And that does track with the transition years of Trump and Obama. So it's not out of the norm. It just is somewhat shocking when you think of how much needs to get packed in to the summer.
We've got new subcommittee chairs in both chambers. That likely to have an impact?
Well, always the chair have their own interest. I think that the big impact will just be that we have both the House and Senate have a brand new subcommittee chair for state and foreign ops. So that is unusual to have them turn over at the same time and to have it be a member who has never chaired a subcommittee of this scale or a subcommittee at all in the case of Barbara Lee in the House. So there's going to be a big learning curve. I think the good thing in the House is it will be easy for them to have a bill that is very similar to the previous year's bill because the House supported those bills, voted on Nita Lowey's bills multiple times. So if Barbara Lee kind of tracks close to that and then just has a few things that she really cares about and puts a stamp on, then she's kind of in a safe place. The Senate, is different because it's now flipped majority. But I mean, I think as Michele and I can attest to, that bill has a lot of bipartisanship because you can't assume 100% Democrats or 100% Republicans vote for it. So as they go into committee, they always have to have buy-in from both sides. But you're going to see new interests. I think in particular, Senator Coons coming into the Senate subcommittee is in a uniquely challenged position because his former chairman, Mr. Leahy, is still the full committee chair. So he is going to have very strong influence on that bill from above, which is unique. You don't usually someone leaves the subcommittee because they retired or they moved on and they're not interested in looking back to that subject matter. And Mr. Leahy has not moved on.
Yeah, okay. Turn to exchanges. As we're trying to make progress in the pandemic, and there's some more possibility to travel and thus participate in exchanges. The Alliance, where I used to work, it put forward a really aggressive request for exchanges of 1.1 billion. That's just in current funding, as you know, is 740 million, which I think there's still a record high number. How might Congress respond to such a large request at a time when there's a lot of other spending? There's a lot of competition for dollars.
It's a lot of competition. I think you're going to see a lot of advocacy groups in the international affairs space showing aspirational levels around a 50% increase. But there's just not, I don't think there's a plausible path where Congress is going to be doubling funding for most programs in a single year. We still have to get a larger total amount of spending agreed to that Republicans and Democrats can agree on. And after all of the COVID relief bills and deficit spending, I think there's going to be more pressure on regular appropriations than people might like to think.
Yeah. I mean, we would love to see a 50% increase. That'd be great. But I think that's a tough ask. It really is. And they're going to need a lot of justification behind that. And so, it's a really crowded field right now, in the international field, especially. So I think that I don't think that level is probably achievable. But I love that it's out there. And I think it's something great to be out there so that, there is kind of showing that we've been steady funded, with a few exceptions of increases for the past decade. I mean, there's been we are at a record high, but it also has been a very, very, very slow climb to that high. And so I think, and asking for a big increase is brave and great, but it's probably not going to get there this year. But it's nice that it's out there.
I agree. One more question on exchanges. Not everybody's aware that, I know you two are, that majority of exchange participants who come to the United States don't come on funded programs, but they come on those programs that state rebranded last year as Bridge USA, summer work and travel, trainee, intern, camp counselor, au pair, high school. I might have missed one in there. And those are all run by organizations, nonprofits and for-profits, that have been approved by the State Department to do that. And they're regulated by the State Department. These organizations don't get any federal money at all. Their revenue comes from participant program fees. And we're in a situation this year where there are virtually no participants, so there was no revenue for these organizations. Thousands of jobs literally in this sector of our field have been lost. And this year, it doesn't look like there's going to be much revenue. And this isn't really my issue, but I raise it because there are people in that sector of the exchange community who are thinking about, should we be asking for a bailout like the travel industry got? What would you tell them? They see themselves as part of the infrastructure of a significant public diplomacy activity.
Yeah. Well, I think there is not a clear understanding among policymakers or even in the State Department of the infrastructure that is being lost because there's no travel going on. And, I do think there is a corollary to the travel industry where you can just say people aren't moving, so fees are not being paid, it's not happening. I think the restaurant industry kind of similarly has made a specific appeal, but, you look at those industries being multitudes of billions of dollars larger and larger constituencies. And so they have been able to kind of encapsulate their ask and get public policymakers' minds wrapped around it. And I think that's the biggest challenge for this area. I would say the people who care about international exchange, it's good. They're aware of these programs and how they work. So educating them on, how they're not going to work if that industry isn't supported, because it is an important thing. But I would say you really need clear champions for the fee-funded programs. And that's going to come with more buy-in and oversight. You could see a case, and I wouldn't call it a COVID relief by, bailout, but maybe something more targeted, going to the public diplomacy, ECA funders, people who support those programs, as an area of, should there be some grant funding to kind of bridge to a place where these are more self-sustaining again. But that will come with some additional buy-in from the Hill. And to do that, you guys are gonna have to be willing to say what you're willing to give too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a trade-off. I think that, if it's a request that's not in a supplemental, then it's a trade-off. Just bottom line, they're going to have to make those decisions. And so if you're advocating for international exchange programs and also for these pay programs, which are really important, and I think that there is a case to be made that there's been a ton of lost revenue and, that they might need grant funding, but outside of a supplemental, it'll be a trade-off, and it'll be a trade-off likely within the ECA account.
Correct. Okay. Thanks. Alistair, you have some questions?
Yep. So we've got plenty of questions coming in on the chat. The first question is about Senate approval for an undersecretary for public diplomacy. Obviously, there hasn't been one for 3 to 4 years. Is there concern on Capitol Hill about this situation? That's a question from Michael Anderson. So Kate, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. I think, so my sense is the administration is waiting to get the 2 deputies confirmed. So they have a Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman nominee, and Brian McEwen, another longtime Biden staffer, for Deputy for Management and Resources. Their hearing is this week in the Foreign Relations Committee, and they're going to kind of move together in tandem. And I think they want those confirmed and in place before they start sending up a lot of other nominees. But the undersecretaries would be the next level. I don't think you'll see an ECA assistant secretary nominee until you have the undersecretary at least out there. I think some people on the Hill probably don't really understand what that job would do and why it would be important. And hopefully, because Biden is such a supporter of public diplomacy, you have someone coming into the job and you have a lot of push from the administration saying how critical it is to have a single person who's looking across all these programs and really trying to figure out how to elevate them and how the image of the US should be, reestablished. So I'm sure you will see that filled, and I think they will be kind of moving apace this spring. But nominations are definitely behind any recent transition by several weeks at this point.
Michele?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add. I mean, I agree. And I think, nominations across the board are kind of delayed right now. And at the department head level. And so there's a focus across the board on getting the heads of all of the agencies in place. And while Senate Foreign Relations can do the nominees, simultaneously, I think that there's a ton going on the Hill. And so, as Kate said, I just think it's just kind of the trickle down effect. They've got to get the undersecretaries in there first, and then they'll kind of look to the others.
So another question here. This one's from Bruce Gregory. Beginning in 1999, appropriators protected budgets for ECA and other PD programs at state for Smith-Mundt and other reasons. This lasted for many years. What is the current status of these legal protections?
Firewall. I think because we don't have an annual State Department authorization bill, this doesn't come up for review and discussion. And I suspect there's maybe like 3 people on the Hill that know that this exists. That actually could be high. I don't think there are 3 people that know that exists. So I think you're going to need to really educate folks about the importance of it. And especially as looking to grow budgets, and it's a perfect opportunity if you have a public diplomacy undersecretary nominee, asking members of the Foreign Relations Committee to ask questions of that person during the confirmation hearing.
Michele, anything to add on that one?
No, I think Kate is one of the 3.
I'm not technically on the Hill anymore. So yeah, it's disconcerting.
2 plus Kate, there we are. Michele, why don't we give this next question to you to begin with? So this is from Greta Morris. She asks, what is most needed on the Hill right now? Is it helping members understand public diplomacy and its role, or is it advocating for specific programs? What are members most interested in? Is it exchanges, broadcasting, presence in the field, or something else altogether?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think truthfully, the answer might not be as direct as you're hoping, just because I think it's both. I think that there's a really good opportunity to both educate and advocate, and you can do that simultaneously. As we said before, there's 2 new chairmen, and so that's really important to go into those offices to highlight the importance of these programs. They're going to be hearing from everyone across the board, but to really elevate the profile of these, to make concerted efforts to meet with staff and members. And then there's a ton of new members. It's a new Congress. And so really taking the opportunity for those offices to highlight the importance of public diplomacy, of broadcasting, of exchanges, kind of across the board with those offices. You can look at the members that are on relevant committees. That's a really good place to start in terms of figuring out where to begin advocacy, because it's a big Congress. But really making those efforts right now, especially before the budget comes out, before appropriations season is wild and out of control. This is the time to just get in there to help members to understand what their priorities could be. And Kate and I love to say, and to build champions. So if there's issues that you see in people's profiles that they've taken an issue to that are in alignment with what you're hoping to advocate for, really utilize that. Go in, talk to staff, build a profile about an important issue, and continue kind of that drumbeat. And education never stops. I mean, that's kind of the fun of it, is that your staff are moving all the time. And so there is just kind of a continual education process. But on advocacy, if there are programs that are really important and that you really care about, it's to kind of target those members that you see as potential champions and on those committees of relevance, and get in there and just start the dialogue and build relationships. It's all about relationships.
Yeah, I totally agree. You got it.
Let me just say one thing, even though I'm not a panelist. I think one of the things, particularly with new members, and you sparked this thought, Michele, with new members and maybe with new staff who they don't know the IVLP or the Fulbright program, and when you start explaining those things, I think we've all had the experience that it's hard to keep people's attention, and it's all kind of abstract to them. Things that work really well with new offices, I find, to get their attention are the numbers we have from Open Doors about the economic impact of foreign students in a particular state or even congressional district. And also, we used to be able to have, and I hope there's still access to this kind of data, the number in it, data was compiled by state. So we used to have nifty little papers for Illinois or Ohio, wherever it was, about how many students in the state of Ohio won Gilmans and how many won Fulbrights and how many Fulbrighters came to Ohio State and Ohio U and the rest. And that kind of data, how many students were taught by foreign language teaching assistants who came in under that program, how many American students were, that kind of data gets people's attention because you're immediately focusing on benefits. I think the benefits to the state leads better to the abstract than the other way, the bigger picture. But
yeah, absolutely. And those fact sheets, are still produced. And I think another key piece of this, the economic recovery from COVID, tapping into the universities and community colleges to talk about the economic impact to them. And, they're all suffering for a variety of reasons and have additional costs, but to be able to show that slice of international students or the prestige that it brings them when they have students going abroad or winning big fellowships, that's something that they care about, would be really critical for their members to hear.
Yeah. Building natural constituencies in international anything is a challenge, but the benefit for exchanges is that it really is a two-way street and it does benefit Americans. Universities are a key part of it, and they are an incredibly important constituency. Kate and I both worked in personal offices before we worked on the committee, and I can tell you that the universities, they had the ear of the member of Congress, absolutely, across the board. And so utilizing university leaders, presidents, anyone who's running the international programs, just utilizing those relationships to really and truly educate staff and to educate them on the importance of these programs, that goes a mile. And Michael, I will tell you, when I recall when you were lobbying us, you did bring those fact sheets, and those are what I kept, and those are what I would write talking points for the senator from, because they were of interest to him. I remember Judd Gregg specifically saying, wait, tell me more about this. Wait, who are these students? Should we be writing them letters? I said, yeah, that'd be great. And so again, really bringing it back to how it benefits a state and how it benefits a constituency is incredibly important. And the benefit with this is that with international exchanges in particular, you really can do that. The rest of the international community, it's very hard to advocate for international programs that don't have a US constituency. So there's a leg up within this.
And Greta had a follow-up to that, which was asking which members in both houses are most supportive of public diplomacy efforts.
Well, luckily, I think you have some of the greatest champions in the leadership positions of the State Department's budget, like Senator Leahy, Senator Graham, Chris Coons. Now in the House, Greg Meeks has taken over the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He has always been a big champion of engagement and study abroad, the Gilman program in particular. But I think you also have the opportunity to try to get folks who've been really excited about supporting the State Department, rebuilding the State Department, people like Joaquin Castro, to get interested in public diplomacy specifically as a rebuilding area. The other kind of untapped thing is the veterans. This Congress, the 117th Congress, has the lowest number of veterans of military service since World War II. There's 91 veterans, but a lot of them are younger, having been in, having signed up after 9/11. Many of them had that experience. And so I think they're a great constituency to try to get excited about public diplomacy, because they naturally talk about their experience overseas and how important it was to engage directly with people, and how much more effective they felt it was when they got to know someone on an individual level than America, writ large. So several of them are on foreign affairs committees, armed services committees. I think they are really natural advocates that haven't quite been kind of cultivated as a group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add. I would just say that there's really great champions that have been there for a while too, which is great. Senator Bozeman is someone that I think is truly a very, very quiet champion, but but his office will go to bat for international programs, international exchanges, diplomacy issues. Senator Coons, the new chairman, he's incredible, and he will do a really good job of carrying the mantle of Senator Leahy and working with Senator Leahy to really protect these programs. Senator Graham's always been a champion of public diplomacy, and he really couples that with kind of the defense, less troops, more diplomats argument. And so I think that you have some really great people. We have a new senator on the committee, Senator Haggerty from Tennessee. He's also on Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is dual-hatted and incredibly important. So that's a good target for that new member advocacy and education piece. So again, thankfully, the great news about state foreign ops is that when appropriators are deciding what committees that they want to be on, really, if you choose state foreign ops, you care, because everyone else, and I say that with a lot of respect for it, but really, because everyone's focused domestically. And so everyone is looking at what benefits their state. What are the things that my constituents are going to be most concerned about? In the House, it's even more of, I think, kind of an amazing thing when someone joins the subcommittee, because again, they're representing a very specific constituency. And so when a member joins this subcommittee, they care. And that is a great thing to know right out of the gates.
Now we have a question that kind of turns things around a little bit. It's from Helena Likkonen-Renga. She represents a foreign embassy in Washington. And she says, we've traditionally organized wonderful staffer trips and some Hill events like briefings on current issues. But what kind of PD works during the time of COVID on Capitol Hill? So I guess it's also about congressional outreach as well as public diplomacy more generally.
This is tough. I know how hard it is. Michele and I have done many of these roundtable or brown bag lunch with a panel discussion on the Hill, and you feel like you're still dragging people to get there. And you are just beating the bushes, making sure you've contacted everybody you've ever met with and every friend you have. Please come and bring a friend, because there's just so many demands on staff time. And so the less fun the event, the harder it is to attract them, and you're not giving them free lunch. So I think it is tough. I think being respectful of folks' time and recognizing that many staff are feeling like they're actually working more now because people think they're just constantly available. And so they can be on a Zoom call back to back throughout the entire day. And so I think appreciating that people are really exhausted by this format. If there is a way to do a socially distanced event in DC, I think people would probably appreciate that, like welcome the opportunity to get out and do that. A lot of staff are still working remotely. They're coming in sort of depending on what is going on in the Hill in the office and what's needed. And so I think that will be the case for a while, but I don't know, it's tough. Michele, I don't know if you have thoughts about like, if there's a really exciting speaker you can bring.
Yeah, the virtual diplomacy in terms of advocating the Hill is tough. It is, it's a hard slog. I echo Kate's point on just really respecting time. If you're going to, kind of come up with an advocacy strategy, make sure that you've done your research, that you know who you're talking to, know if they've done an exchange, or if their dad was a diplomat and their mom was, an ambassador. You just never know. So do as much research as you can to kind of, again, to understand who you're talking to, what their interests are, what the priorities of the congresswoman or man is, and then just really and truly keep it short, keep it brief and to the point. And you can always follow up with more information, always leave an open door for someone to contact you back. And let's just hope that, my hope is by summer that really things start to open up again, and that we're going to just kind of go back to in-person advocacy, because it's just far more fun.
So, okay, next question here is from Jacqueline D'Amico, and she says, the United States has been called untrustworthy in the past couple of years. So if the US is perceived as incompetent and untrustworthy, then how can our foreign policy objectives be fulfilled?
Yeah, I think that's something that we're gonna hear again and again. And I think the US, Congress, our diplomats all have a big job ahead of them, and to kind of rebuild that trust, to rebuild that attention on, mutually beneficial programs. you know, to really emphasize the point that we do care about the rest of the world. And we always have. We just had a president that wasn't engaged in that way for 4 years. And so again, and Biden has been really out front on this, thankfully, and he has, again, a really strong track record. So it's just really beating the drum, and for us to do that as well, you know, for us to be engaging internationally, to find ways to really highlight the importance of exchange, of diplomacy, of partnerships with other countries, just to kind of rebuild that trust. But I think, you know, trust is something that's earned, and so it's going to take a while.
Yeah, I agree. I think getting back to the root of people-to-people interaction and helping people understand America from the perspective of an American.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is from Bridget Serchak about US AGM. She asks about any information on a potential nominee for CEO of US AGM, and also any thoughts on the US AGM Advisory Council, not the Advisory Council for the congressional grantees that's already in place, but the Advisory Council for US AGM.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have any good intel on nominees. You know, the fact that Rick Stengel, who was the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy in the Obama administration, was the Biden transition lead for broadcasting, was, I think, kind of indicative. He's got an interest there. He maybe might be looking to come back in. You know, typically you do have somebody who has that profile, kind of a broader media experience. But I do think this is one, it's possible they won't fill out all the staffing until they've done some evaluation. And this is just my sense of the situation. Not any, you know, keen, no inside information, but just, it seems like they really do need to get their arms around, is the structure right? Do they need to make adjustments? And so they might not want to fill positions if they don't have the answer to that. And I just don't know where the transition folks are, because they haven't announced any people for that particular area.
Yeah, I think USAGM is so important, and it plays such a crucial role, but there's a lot of competition just because there's a lot of content. And so how content is distributed, and, you know, the US role and how it's disseminated, it's always been a tricky issue. And now, kind of with all the technologies that we have, and truthfully all the sources of information, and how to get those into different places, I know that there's been just a lot of talk in the last several years about if USAGM is structured correctly, as Kate was saying. And so just figuring out that, sadly, I don't know any timelines on when a new CEO would be appointed, but I think that the authorizers are looking at this. This is something that it's definitely on their radar. And so just timing around that it'll just have to remain to be seen, I think.
Yeah.
So a good question here from Brian Carlson, asking about the Inspector General system. So do you anticipate interest and or legislation in strengthening the OIG system, including at state? Some recommend that Congress should protect inspectors general from being fired by the administration, especially when they begin to investigate and report on bad management and even illicit activities being carried out inside government organizations like the State Department.
Yeah, I think, you know, we've identified a lot of problems, but I think this is one where you could say is probably going to be that second tier or area where you need to have folks who are really interested in like the inner workings of the department to take that on and take a longer lead. I also would caution that even though the State Department IG and his former secretary got a lot of attention for their battles, from my OMB days, I know there is a very strong sense on the Hill to make sure that all the IGs kind of are on a level playing field, and that you don't end up dipping in to try to help out one IG or create different mechanisms for one department's IG versus another. And, you know, there's this IG council, I can't remember what its acronym is, but I do think you are going to see a renewed interest on the Hill of those kind of government operations people probably like a Jerry Connolly on the House Oversight Committee, who knows a lot about the State Department and who has a lot of Foreign Service officers in his district, and also is really into like government operations, kind of dig into what do we need to do to reform these systems, because we saw when things could be abused that people didn't anticipate.
Yeah. I think there's always been kind of a support for the IG, at least not from an appropriations standpoint. You know, we had IGs for Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria, I think. I mean, we're always kind of creating new ones to look at specific issues. And so I think that the IG has always had a very good ear on Capitol Hill. So again, if Congress is interested in kind of boosting the role and bolstering the importance of it, they will. But I do think it'll probably be a while until we get to those issues. But authorizers really are taking, they do keep a very good tab on these things. And so their pulse is probably already attuned with this.
Question here from Reva Gupta about diversity, equity, and inclusion at state. What is the Hill interested in hearing about with regards to DEI work at state? There is work being done with regards to staff here in DC and overseas, including with locally employed staff in embassies, and thoughts about how to message with foreign audience about DEI issues. How can we report this to the Hill and to whom?
It's definitely a really keen topic for everybody. For the public diplomacy area, I really encourage you all to talk about how these programs can be a pipeline in recruiting more Americans to go into diplomatic and development corps. It's a big concern. Certainly the Biden administration has it on their radar. Lots of people on the Hill have it on their radar. There just is not enough people of color and other diverse backgrounds, economic, whatever, that are attracted to the service and retained. And so I think, going into an exchange or language learning is a perfect entree to a career in that area, even if a young person doesn't realize it. So developing more pipeline activities is important, and also making sure policymakers understand that you can't just flip the switch and be like, okay, now you need to just hire a bunch more people, and that you don't have folks who there isn't as much interest. So I think that's an opportunity for people to be talking about, but certainly you're going to have that push-pull of we need to grow the Foreign Service and put a bunch more money in it this year, but it's not necessarily growing it with diversity in mind, because those people may not be ready and interested. And so it has to start much earlier at the high school level in exchange or in language learning and through college, and getting people who are interested in going into those areas. And there are a couple, small programs like the Boren, that's a language program that has a government service component, and others like the Gilman that, is bringing Pell eligible students to go study abroad. But I think making people aware of those and trying to connect the dots of how that could actually help increase the diversity of our diplomatic corps would be an important area to highlight.
Mm-hmm. And HBCUs and community colleges that, I just encourage a lot more outreach and a lot more education, both internally to students on the opportunities, certainly. So we do have just a pipeline of great young people that are interested, but also outreach to the Hill. If you're an HBCU, just get up there and tell the Hill kind of what your portfolio looks like in terms of exchanges or diplomacy programs, and how you're working to kind of cultivate the next, the next era of leadership.
Question from Cynthia Efford about information programs and outreach. So a perennial concern in the whole of government coordination of US governmental information outreach, especially between the military and diplomatic instruments. Do you see someone at the National Security Council being responsible for information, or is there primacy for state to play a role in coordinating? Where do you see that going?
I think I would love to see someone at the NSC taking this on. I haven't seen an indication yet, but I think the fact that President Biden has so much experience and insight into all of these different programs, that you're going to see some reform happen in terms of coordination between the agencies. And there's definitely a lot of pressure and interest that there will be lessons learned from the way the Bush administration and Obama administrations handled this, deferring some things over to DOD because they had the money and they had constraints in the State Department area. So there's definitely a lot of demand from the Hill to kind of reform how those things have been done and put them more appropriately back to the State Department. But I don't think you can, again, just switch that over. State, there will have to be some direction from above and pushing to get the DOD to give some things up as well. But this is the perfect time to do it. I suspect this will be something you will see a signal from the Biden administration of their policy in this area, but it probably won't be the first thing out of the gate.
Yeah, I think we see a little bit of a signal already. The nomination of Samantha Powers to head USAID and giving her kind of the same classification as all the other department heads, kind of elevating her to a cabinet level position, whereas USAID wasn't before. And I know that this is outside of the scope. This is a development agency, but I think that's really important if we're going to have really a robust, holistic approach to how we operate and the importance of linking development and diplomacy and defense. Then really giving her the authority of the other cabinet members is huge. And so I already see that as a really good sign that this is a priority, and hopefully that will just allow for more robust conversations and really kind of that partnership between the agencies to make sure that all those the three-legged stool is really being looked at comprehensively.
Great. So we've got lots more questions in. We have about 10 minutes left. So Mike, I want to make sure as well that you have a chance to ask any other questions, but I'll pick a couple more from here. There's a big question here a couple of people have in relation to the future of exchanges with China. Both Barry Fulton and Michael Anderson are interested in this. So they ask, the Trump administration tightened up many exchange programs and other programs with China, and particularly with regards to the Confucius Institutes and how they are treated in the US. Do you expect the Biden team to lift some of these restrictions? And they specifically mention the Fulbright program and the Peace Corps in China.
It's going to be hard. I mean, I think Biden, you've seen taking very cautious steps on China, not 100% reversing Trump decisions on trade and other things so far. And some of the restrictions like on communications equipment and things, I think Biden could stay with where the Trump administration was. And there is bipartisan support from the Hill and concern from the Hill that really China has taken advantage of some opportunities. I'm hopeful that on the core exchange programs that are not subject to really infiltration by those who are trying to take advantage of the US, that those can resume in a meaningful way, and that people can understand that these are, people trying to pursue their career. It's not going to have an implication on national security or national security agencies. But those that have folks who might be going into the military or intel agencies in the future, I think that is going to be hard for some time until we get to a better place with China. And I think we are entering into a breakup with China, where an economic breakup, at least, where we're going to figure out ways where we're tacitly still working with each other, but we're not happy with each other for quite some time. And it may not be quite as adversarial as it was during the Trump administration, but unfortunately, we're having some tectonic shifts on the economic side. So I'm hopeful that regular exchanges, the people-to-people engagement that are not related to intel careers can resume, and that they can just be part of our the cultural understanding of each other. And that should be a perfectly appropriate thing to do, I believe, as an independent citizen, which is what I get to be right now.
Yeah, I completely agree on all accounts.
Great. Okay, let's see what would be good to go with next. Okay. Do you have a sense, this is from Kristen Lord, do you have a sense of what will resonate most on the Hill right now when it comes to public diplomacy? Are there specific issues such as COVID-19 recovery, disinformation, rise of authoritarianism, global youth boom, etc., that would resonate most? Or is it better to talk about public diplomacy more broadly as an instrument of US foreign policy?
Well, this is the subject of Michele and I's day job and what we are talking about all the time. And so I think it's a little bit of both. A transition year with Biden coming in, particularly as a public diplomacy and broadly international engagement advocate, this is the opportunity to say, hey, we need to remind ourselves of a tool that has been maintained by Congress, but greatly diminished by the previous administration and should be invested in because of all these great benefits. But I think you also do need to be able to drill into a couple areas where you see opportunities for growth, whether it's unmet demand or just a significant, like the youth boom, like an area where there's an opportunity that could be missed if we weren't preparing for it now, or greatly increased costs, like because of COVID. But because as you get into more detailed conversations with the Hill, they're going to need to know what increases really are going to be used for, what the proposal is. Michele, I'm sure you have more on.
No, I mean, I think, Kristen knows this better than anyone, but really just approaching the Hill again with understanding who you're meeting with. It's going to be different for every office, and it'll be different for who you're talking to. And truthfully, all the issues you raised are simultaneously important, but to be strategic in how you approach different offices, to understand their interests and really where to kind of push the pressure on a certain issue is key. It's key because it just helps people to engage and to understand an issue that will always be bigger than comprehensible at first bite, to get interested and to get in the door. And I think that this year, especially with everything being virtual and so much need domestically and abroad, that that's the big challenge.
Another question that goes back to the Inspector General discussion earlier on about why US AGM doesn't have its own Office of the Inspector General. It is the largest independent federal agency without its own OIG. Being under the state OIG, there's much less focus on the operations of US AGM. And that question is, again, from Bridget Serchik.
Didn't it used to, Kate?
I guess this was part of the 99 reorganization. And so Michael probably can speak to this better because I'd like to pretend that I wasn't doing any of this in 99, but I was. But I think that this was part of the breakup of USIA and not wanting to create great new federal apparatus and having some things rolled into the State Department. But it's probably, I think there's a very good case to be made now that having somebody watching that at all times would be good.
Yeah.
I hope Congress will relook at that authorization, because I think whatever the intent was, I wasn't paying very close attention to it a few years ago. I don't see how it met that intent.
Congress loves an IG. I feel like that would be a good ask. I think that's something, if it's a priority, all you got to do is just go talk to someone and they'd be like, wait, what? We don't have one? I did not know that. I'm not going to lie.
This might be the last question.
Siggy. Look, two people answered my question. The SIGI is the IG Council. That's right. They're going to love this idea. Go to the SIGI.
So I wanted to leave this question to the end because it's a pretty big question to finish things off. Also from Brian Carlson. Is there a possibility of getting state an annual authorization act the way the DoD always gets a new authorization every year? As you know, that enables the military to continually adapt, start new programs, react to changing challenges, invent new ways of doing things, etc. State does not have that degree of freedom to innovate and meet changing times.
Well, whatever we can do to encourage innovation, I think that's a good thing. I'm not sure a more congressional intervention would do that. But you know, the annual authorization bill kind of, people got intimidated of doing that on the Hill because it would bring up, you know, a single bill on the floor for days in the Senate or hours in the House, and lots of amendments on every foreign policy issue. And it became, you know, a way to beat up members on specific issues, make it difficult make them take hard votes on policy matters for around the entire globe. And it seemed like it didn't have a policy benefit to Congress to do that annually. But the last few chairmen, and now as I'm thinking about this, we've now gone through 3 or 4 chairmen of the foreign affairs committees. So I'm hoping we're now getting into a steady state with Greg Meeks in the House, somebody who will be there for a period of time and be able to kind of carry through more of a vision. But the last few years, we've had the chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committee say, okay, let's just do a mini authorization bill. We're going to just deal with kind of targeted things that need to be adjusted, whether it's a funding level authorization ceiling or some tweak, but really narrow things that we can get bipartisan support on, and that basically it's not going to make a bunch of members of Congress walk a plank on a foreign policy issue that they don't have a clue about. So they've been able to pass those pretty consistently, and the House Foreign Affairs Committee Meeks actually just put forward one this last week, and they're very vanilla. But unfortunately, they don't touch on public diplomacy at all. So they feel like all those things that are in Fulbright-Hays Act, they're on autopilot. We can just not touch them, and then we don't have to debate it and figure out the next way. But it would be nice if we had some leadership from the administration and folks in Congress to really look at public diplomacy overall and say, where are some changes that should be made, and looking at it as an interconnected ecosystem rather than just these kind of narrow splices that need to be adjusted. But I think you're seeing the Foreign Affairs Committees starting this process the last few years of a mini bill, and with the hope that if they can get used to passing that, then they can start expanding that bill. But I don't think it will ever end up being like the NDAA, where you reauthorize every single line item, just because no one has a clue how to do that. And again, it gets into these foreign policy issues that most members of Congress would rather avoid. So I think it's going to be tough to argue for that, but it would be nice to have more of an overarching policy objective rather than just these rifle shot little tweaks that they need to do.
Yeah, I agree. Sadly, I mean, I think it's a real disadvantage for the appropriators and for innovation at large to not have it. But, you know, this has just been the way it is forever. I mean, wasn't it like
94,
something?
94, yeah, I think so.
One, okay. I mean, it's been decades, and so now you just see kind of issue legislating. You see, you know, Farm Bill and Global Food Security Act and trafficking. I mean, so that it just becomes kind of a siloed issue. You know, again, this would be something as a new Congress approaches this would be a great issue to raise with the authorizing committees. And to get diplomacy squarely into that sort of the mini authorizing bill. I think it'd be really important and valuable.
Well, thank you very much for those wonderful insights, and thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. So I'm going to hand it over now to Joel Fishman, the president of PDAA, Public Diplomacy Association of America, to finish things off and tell us about some events that are coming up.
Well, thank you, Alistair, and thanks to Kate Eltrich and Michele Wymer. It is wonderfully refreshing and reassuring to see representatives of both parties work so well together. And thanks especially to Mike McCary for organizing this program today. A video of this program and videos of previous programs are available on publicdiplomacy.org. Just go to the PDAA site and it's on the landing page. We, the 3 co-sponsors of the First Monday series, have some interesting programs coming up for you. On Monday, March 8th, 1 week from today at 12 noon, we will have the inaugural installment of the PDC Rising Professionals Career Decision Series. The first of the series will be Nothing to Fear but Fear Itself, Demystifying the Foreign Service Officer Test. The program will feature FSO and current diplomat in residence for DC Metro, Yolanda Kearney. Dr. Kearney is a Lois Roth winner She'll guide viewers through the latest version of the Foreign Service Officer Test and advise test takers on what to expect with tips for success. She will also address current Foreign Service hiring trends and future forecasts. Please note that today is the deadline for RSVPs for this program. Alastair has posted the URL to the chat box. And then on Friday, March 12 at 12 noon, we will have the USC Annenberg Public Diplomacy Forum, Preparing Public Diplomacy for 21st Century Challenges, the short list from the Advisory Commission for Public Diplomacy. The program will feature Vivian Walker, a speaker known to us, well known to us, and Sean Baxter, Senior Advisor of the Advisory Commission. Please RSVP directly. The email address again is in the chat box. And finally, our April 1st Monday, 1 month from today, April 5th, we will have a change of pace as USC hosts Mark Katz, author of the book, The Power of Hip Hop Diplomacy. On behalf of USC Annenberg, the Public Diplomacy Council, and the Public Diplomacy Association of America, thank you for joining us today. See you soon. Stay safe.